systems failures, what progress has the Secretary of State made in considering post-quantum cryptography to prevent the so-called Y2Q, the end of privacy? And what support is being provided for the development of quantum computing in the UK after the recent announcement of the Willow chip?
I'm grateful for this question. He'll know full well that there are breakthroughs in quantum happening all the time. These are often breakthroughs which are happening because of the scientific endeavours happening in our country, for which we should be proud. When it comes to encryption, government has a set of policies to actually make sure that our systems and our country is prepared for the challenges and opportunities of the quantum era, and those policies remain active as we speak. When it comes to investment in quantum, I was up in Glasgow announcing not so long ago £100 million for 5 quantum hubs. This is the kind of investment you can expect from this government to keep our country at the cutting edge.
And Foodie.
Question number 4, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, no one anywhere in the UK should have difficulty using government services, and the government is committed to ensuring that its online and digital services are as accessible as possible. And although there are globally recognised standards for digital accessibility, this is only part of design and inclusive service, and that is why we will be revising the government service standards to incorporate requirements covering wider issues of inclusion and looking at and extending their scope to the wider public sector.
Foodie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for that answer. Recently, I attended a roundtable of small businesses in the North East held at Sage, and a key theme was the need for good connections and digital services to help their businesses to grow. Digital connectivity, of course, is critical when it comes, and it often holds them back. Can the Minister tell me what the government is doing to ensure that digital infrastructure is strong enough to support local businesses in constituencies like mine?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for that question. It is right that not only do we need to have good online accessible services, but businesses need to be able to connect to those services, and that's why the government is committed to delivering nationwide gigabit connectivity coverage by 2030. And I'm glad to say that over 94% of premises in my honourable friend's constituency can access gigabit broadband, including the businesses that she refers to. But of course, I'm happy to meet the honourable friend to talk about what more we can do in this important area.
Jess Brown-Fuller.
The Sussex Bookshop is a new bookshop that's opened in Chichester City Centre. They opened in December. It's now February, and they are unable to connect to any sort of internet provision because Openreach are reporting there are no extra connections for the whole of the city centre. Does the Minister agree that reliable internet access is essential, especially for small businesses that have to operate both on the high street but also on an online platform? And what steps is she taking to ensure that those businesses have access now, not in 2030?
I think it's linked to the South East. I think that was the question.
I absolutely agree with the honourable member, and businesses across the country should be able to connect, especially in this day and age. But if the business constituency continue to experience problems, my honourable friend, the Minister Bryant, will be happy to meet with her to discuss this issue further.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, digital services for small businesses is important across the country, North East, South East, wherever you are. But yet, the latest data shows that only around 15% of UK SMEs use AI, well behind other countries such as Denmark or Finland. So will the Minister commit to publishing a detailed adoption roadmap that could cover, for example, essential upskilling, data centre capacity, tech vouchers, so that small businesses can deploy AI without being locked out by cost and complexity?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for that question. She would have seen the AI Opportunities Action Plan, which sets out our aspiration for this country, including the opportunities for small businesses, and the fusion of AI across the economy is top of the agenda. And in the coming months, you will see more activity on how we're going to do that.
Irene Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 5.
Our aim is to phase out animal testing as soon as is practicable. We've been working closely with science, and that was a manifesto commitment of ours. We have been meeting with scientists and with other departments because it's not a sole responsibility of DCIT, and we intend to publish a strategy by the end of this year to make good on our manifesto commitment.
Irene Campbell.
I'm grateful to the Minister for his answer. I'm aware of the APPG on phasing out animal experiments in medical research, where members from all parties can work together to push for scientific experiments which do not rely on animal cruelty and encourage a focus on non-animal replacements. Would the Minister meet with me and the APPG to discuss future plans and strategy for the manifesto commitment on phasing out animal testing?
I didn't know that she'd taken over the APBG. I think it's a really good thing that that exists, and we will work very closely with the APBG, whether I'm the right minister or there's a more intelligent minister who might be of more assistance to her, or a more charming one perhaps, who might be of more assistance to her. I will make sure she gets all the ministers that she needs.
Mr. Speaker, in my constituency of Huntingdon, I have 2 sites that form a key component of preclinical animal testing. Labcorp, where the testing takes place, and Marshall Bioresources, where the beagle puppies are bred and then tested on. Almost none survive the testing process. Whilst I do not support animal testing, I recognise that it is currently a necessary element of the preclinical testing process and cannot be phased out until non-animal methods have sufficient scope. The Minister for Science, Research and Innovation wrote to me in September outlining the government's approach to phasing out animal testing, but can the government publish a timeline of what tests will be phased out by NC3R's research work and when?
I can't provide him with that timeline now. We are working at pace on trying to put together a practicable policy and a strategy, which, as I said, we'll be publishing by the end of the year. He makes a perfectly good point about the complexities that there are. If the MHRA is to be able to meet its international commitments as well as our manifesto commitments, that's not going to be easy. So we are very happy to work with the sector as well as with other departments to be able to deliver this, and I'm happy to have a conversation with him if that would help.
Justice Sutter.
Thanks, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Honourable Lady for the campaigning work she does on this subject, both as an individual MP, as a campaigner, and also chair of her important APPG. The Independent Pornography Review is wide-ranging and thorough piece of work which assessed the effectiveness of pornography legislation, regulation and enforcement, including online and offline regulation. The review is now concluded and the final report will be published in due course, and I'd like to put on the record my gratitude to Baroness Burton for her hard work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for the answer. Online pornography sites are awash with content that depicts sexual activity with children. Adult performers are made to look like children through props such as stuffed toys and school uniforms. Popular search tags include homework, pigtails, teen and barely legal, and this content is often particularly violent. Videos also depict incest, such as sex between fathers and daughters and brothers and sisters, which are very prevalent. Child protection experts warn that this content, which is...
What a week again. All eyes on the White House, closer to home on WhatsApp. I just want to start with asking you, every time I work with you, you're constantly, both of you, on your phones all the time.
I'm looking at it now, just to be absolutely...
Yeah. Have you calculated how many hours you're on your phone each day, Robert?
Look, I'm sure I could ask my phone to do that for me. I mean, it's too much. I'd rather not know.
My phone tells me, I ignore it.
You live on your phone.
Don't want to know.
You live on your phone. I guess it's the nature of the job now, is it? If you go back 20 years, you wouldn't be using WhatsApp messages to conduct your business within the Westminster bubble. But now, tell me, how much is it crucial to getting those scoops?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's the way everyone communicates. It's the way people communicate with each other in groups. It's the way you communicate directly with MPs and with special advisors. One of the things actually is how it's killed email. Email is, you get press releases on email and stuff that is meant for a very wide distribution, but is often not that particularly useful. And I find increasingly if somebody to something and make sure I've heard it, they use the WhatsApp. MPs have even started directing me to their officers. If I'm setting up a meeting, they'll say WhatsApp this person in my office, and that even a year ago, I would say that used to be in an email. So it's just taking over.
When it began, though, Robert, we were kind of lulled into a false sense of security that WhatsApp was encrypted. These messages couldn't be seen, but we obviously now know that because of the screenshot, they can be seen by anybody who chooses to forward them on.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's like any group that you have a conversation with. I mean, obviously, the encryption is real. They're quite hard to hack. But if you happen to be in a group and you don't know all the members, or one member decides to go rogue, there is literally nothing that you might say that you could be confident won't work, won't end up in the public domain. And I think one of the things that obviously people have learned to their cost, I mean, we actually saw this in the early phases of the COVID inquiry, people will say things in WhatsApp groups that it's like obviously a private conversation, because we hope there are a few people out there listening to us. But after the show, we'll do a little debrief verbally that we hope other people aren't listening. So it is amazing to me how naive people were in thinking that a permanent written it was somehow not, particularly if they're saying something appalling. They can. I was in the lobby of the House of Commons as a political in the 90s, and the working practices have massively changed as a result of all sorts of different technologies. In those days, every single day there were hundreds of journalists sharing nuggets of information. They don't have anymore. Even though we're in the same physical space. But, when we were talking about this, because actually of the shock, many of us felt reading the terrible things that the Labour MP or Labour Minister, Andrew Gwynne's remarks that, are, anti-Semitic, racist, some would say. It's pretty extraordinary.
Pensioners, absolutely. There's hardly anyone he didn't defend with that. I mean, it's extraordinary that anyone would say those things in private, in a professional setting, let alone write them down. I mean, that, as Robert said, many people. Even the cabinet secretary was, supposedly the holder of propriety and ethics and all good sense within the government, was caught up in the COVID thing.
Let's remember then of some of those bigger moments when others, as you say, have been caught out by what they've written in a message.
Was a bit the text.
A headache for Matt Hancock.
The comms are awful.
Nicola Sturgeon turns the WhatsApp messages about Boris Johnson's government are read out at the COVID inquiry.
A second Labour MP is suspended over offensive WhatsApp message. Ryan is.
Has it changed the way you what you commit to WhatsApp with an MP when you're trying to get a scoop?
Well, I mean, it started off, and I was told never write anything down that you wouldn't want to be made public. And that is simple rule. Gulled people into being much more open, and the most thing, Iranian crews, British tanks who are having British track in Britain to share information. So they're obviously incredibly confident about the encryption. But any group is safe as the weakest person in the group.
Yeah, and you hear in the way of MPs thinking, what have I written in 2017 that could... I know.
Just checking what's there and wondering whether there's ever a capacity. Well, the problem is they can. But this is going to be nerve-wracking for people. I mean, one of the things that, of course, now is set a timer for deletion, so I mean, you'll pretty much every MP that you contact now is that if you're contacting for the first time,
these messages will disappear.
Normally. So people are sort of belatedly learning, but I mean, Carl's point is right. Anybody with any common sense, would never. It's like, the thing that is sort of extraordinary in a way. If Gwyn is saying this on WhatsApp, you do slightly wonder what he was saying to private, because all the reflection of stuff that he's thinking, and I think one of the reasons why people are so upset, absolutely rightly, with these disclosures, is because of what it expressed.
Yeah, and it does say something about the culture of the Labour Party in that part of the world and what was seen as acceptable discourse, and it does say something quite unnerving about that. There's something going wrong up there.
And what does it tell us about how Labour responded to the discovery of these messages?
Well, it just shows yet again that Starmer is somebody who doesn't muck about when it comes to getting rid of people who could be an embarrassment to him and the party. I mean, he did move incredibly fast to suspend both Ryan and Gwyn and now all the other councillors and members of that group. I mean, he genuinely doesn't mess about.
Yeah. I mean, I think in this case, because the stuff that Gwyn said was so awful, it was a very easy decision to kick him out and suspend him from the party. And once that had happened, the others almost...
But we've seen... Look, but let's be clear, although, yes, you'd think it was easy, but we've seen with the past the previous government, how long it sometimes takes for, Prime Ministers. Boris Johnson quite often took ludicrous amounts of time to take action against people who plainly crossed lines.
Yeah, he famously didn't like sacking people because the media had got to them, didn't he?
Mm. I'd like to congratulate you on having that phone face down for the entire duration of our chat while we look ahead to what's going to happen in the next hour or so with PMQs as we wait for the Prime Minister to take those questions from the Leader of the Opposition.
There's Peter Kyle, fresh from, currying favour with Donald, not signing the AI statement that Macron wanted to put out.
Let's have a listen in.
This week we progressed our Borders Bill to deliver counter-terrorism-style powers to bring vile criminal smuggling gangs to justice. We also announced a further £350 million to get Britain building and deliver 1.5 million new homes our country desperately needs, including more affordable homes. We've slashed red tape that holds businesses and working people back, creating 10,000 more apprentices. This morning I have meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was proud to have played my part in helping draft what has now become the Employment Rights Bill. A new poll shows 3/4 of the British public back the stronger rights for workers in the bill, including better sick leave. Yet that lot over there, the Tories and Reform, disgracefully voted against it. In fact, the Leader of the Opposition doesn't even believe in maternity pay or the living wage. Mr. Speaker, our statutory sick pay is ranked one of the lowest in Europe. It needs to be brought in line with the living wage. So will the Prime Minister back my campaign to strengthen this bill further so sick pay is at the level that finally stops punishing workers for being sick?
Mr Speaker, our plan for change delivers the biggest upgrade in workers' rights in a generation to our employment rights bill. Ending exploitative zero-hour contracts, ending the scandal of fire and rehire, extending statutory sick pay to 1.3 million employees. Of course, that's on top of the pay rise for 3 million of the lowest paid. I would have thought the Leader of the Opposition might actually sort of support day one protection employment rights given when, but she thinks maternity leave is excessive and growth.
Leader of the Opposition,
Mr Speaker, concern family scheme, and in total, over 200,000 Ukrainians, mostly women, children and the elderly, found sanctuary in the UK from Putin's war. However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using the scheme ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong. It cannot be allowed to stand. Is the government planning to appeal on any points of law? And if so, which ones?
Minister. Mr Speaker, let me be clear. I do not agree with the decision. She's right. It's the wrong decision. She hasn't quite done her homework because the decision in question taken under the last government according to the legal framework of the last government. But, Mr Speaker, let me be clear. It should be Parliament that makes the rules. To close a particular case.
Mr Speaker, he did not answer the question. If he plans to appeal, then the appeal, and if he does not appeal, the law definitely will need to be changed. He talks about a decision made under the last government. It's not the courts. The issue we are discussing today is about judicial decisions. We cannot be in a situation where enormous numbers of people to exploit our laws in this way. In terrible situations, we cannot help them.
And we come into this country.
If the Prime Minister was on top of his brief, perhaps he'd be able to answer some questions. Given this crazy decision, and so many others, new legislation is needed to clarify the right to a family life in Article 8. I'm not talking about what he just said. I know Labour MPs don't understand much of what they're saying, but the Prime Minister literally wrote a book on the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a situation where we need to put our national interest before the ECHR. Does he agree that we should legislate even if lawyers warn that this might be incompatible with human rights law?
Plays about answers and questions. Her script doesn't allow her to listen to the answer.
Prime Minister.
She asked me if we're going to change the law. Yes. She asked me again in question 2, and I said yes. She asked me again in question still yes.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't listen to question one. I asked if he would appeal the decision. He did not answer that. He's not listening. He's too busy defending the international human rights law framework. Mr. Speaker, this case has arisen because a Palestinian came to the UK from Gaza in 2007. He is now a British citizen. This is precisely why we need to break the conveyor from arriving in the UK to acquiring indefinite leave to remain, and then a British passport, and now a right to bring 6 family members here as well. Just last week, the Prime Minister bizarrely claimed that a British passport was not a pull factor for those coming to the UK. Will he now support our plans to toughen the process on indefinite leave to remain and make getting a British passport a privilege, not a right?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, they presided over record high levels of immigration. It reached nearly 1 million. It was a one-nation experiment in open borders. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one campaigning for more people to come and thanking her own side when they thwarted her campaign. Before she lectures us, I think she needs to reflect on her own record, here.
Mr. Speaker, he is the Prime Minister now. The people out there want to know what he is going to do about the situation. He needs to spend less time whining about the last government and do his job. I thought, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister and I both agreed that Israel had a right to defend herself. Yet the judge in this case noted that the family were facing a humanitarian crisis, and I quote, as a consequence of the Israeli government's indiscriminate attempts to eliminate Hamas, and government lawyers accepted this. Is the Prime Minister allowing lawyers to change the position on Israel? And was this because of advice from the Attorney General? And if not, why on earth did government lawyers accept the argument that Israeli actions were indiscriminate?
Prime Minister. They put the complete opposite argument. She talks about on top of her brief. She has no idea what she's talking about. I'll tell her again. We need to change the law. That's why the Home Secretary is already closing the gap. I know the script doesn't allow any adaptation, but this is getting tedious.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has not read the judgment. I suggest that he does. There are very serious questions now. Being asked about the Attorney General, the Prime Minister's personal friend and donor. Even Labour ministers are concerned. One Labour peer, Lord Glassman, has called him the absolute archetype of an arrogant, aggressive fool. If we are serious about protecting our borders, we need to make sure we appoint people who believe in our country and everything we stand for. It is not clear the Attorney General does. The government is now recruiting a new Chief Inspector of Borders who lives in Finland. This is not serious. Why should the British public put up with this?
The individual in question was appointed in 2019 by the last government to a senior position. Then worked for 5 years from Finland. We've changed that, and he's now going to be working from the United Kingdom full-time. Finland under them. And she talks about the Attorney General. She sat round the cabinet table with an attorney who was later sacked for breaching national security.
Charlotte Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Long-standing traders in the CPS Centre in Culcheth were devastated to receive eviction notices, giving them just 28 days to vacate, entirely out of the blue and under spurious pretexts by the new owner, shell company Shivat Hananim Capital. So far, the owner and their legal representatives have failed to hear tenants' concerns and mine and to negotiate a way forward. So does the Prime Minister share my concerns at this situation, and will he set out our plans to protect independent businesses which are at the heart of our high street and communities?
Prime Minister. Well, thank you for raising this, which is obviously of real concern to businesses in her constituency. We do, Mr. Speaker, expect landlords to meet their obligations to make buildings safe, and we support robust enforcement action from the regulators if they fail to do so. I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the Minister to discuss what steps can be taken in the particular case to support the businesses that her constituents rely on.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 80 years ago this week, the Allies began a pincer movement against German forces between the Ruhr and the Rhine. British and Canadian troops attacked from the north, Americans from the south. British, Canadian and American soldiers fighting shoulder to defeat fascists. 8 years on, President Trump seems to have forgotten all this. His tariffs against steel and aluminium will hit Canada the hardest and will also hit jobs and the cost of living in our country. So in reminding President Trump who America's true and long-standing friends and allies really are, will the Prime Minister also prepare a plan for tariffs in return, starting with tariffs on American electric cars?
Liberal trade. Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, he's right to reference our history in the 80-year anniversary. Of course, we were fighting alongside the Americans, and that is amongst the reasons we have a special relationship. British is an essential part of our heartlands, and we will not abandon our skilled force. And it needs a level-headed assessment of the implications, which is what we're going through at the moment. But we will always put our national interest first and steelworkers first.
Sir Ed Davey. Thank the Prime Minister for that reply. But it seems to me the way President Trump and his ally Musk are operating, they do need to hear strong measures and words from even their allies. And moving on to Ukraine, Mr. Speaker, if Ukraine is forced to surrender its own sovereign territory to Russia, it will be the greatest betrayal of a European ally since Poland in 1945. But President Trump says Ukraine may end up Russian, and he wants American money back. I think we all fear where this could end and the dangerous implications for our defence and our security. So can the Prime Minister reassure this House that he and other European leaders have given sufficient support to President Zelensky so that he can't be bullied by Trump and Putin into accepting a deal who will effectively hand victory to Russia?
As in Kyiv just a few weeks ago at my 8th meeting, the position since the outbreak of this has been a united position across the House of supporting Ukraine, and I was able to reiterate my position, which is we must put Ukraine in the strongest possible position. That matters now just as much as it mattered at the beginning of this conflict, the strongest possible position, and I did discuss with him what we can do, what more our allies can do to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position.
Kim Leadbeat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, from the benches opposite, I published my Healthy Britain report, recommending a cross-departmental approach to improving health and wellbeing. Now that we're in government, I'm delighted that ministers have hit the ground running, because running is obviously confirmed that last week's announcement of an increase to the public Britain healthier, happier and more productive, reduce pressure on the NHS.
I thank her for highlighting the important role that local communities play in supporting healthy lifestyles. I'm to speak smoking services and drug abuse treatment.
Saoirse Eastwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, I get it. Nobody wants to get into a trade war. But, you know, unlike Peter Mandelson, sometimes you've got to stand up for what you believe in. My friends here in the DUP have learned to confirm their mistake of backing Brexit and think that tariffs are a laughing matter. No. Agree with me that actually we need to stand up for ourselves, we need to back our workers, we need to back our business, not just in Lagan Valley, but indeed across the UK.
Well, yes, of course. The US and the UK share a strong and balanced trading relationship. We invest in each other's economies, and we will continue to work closely Trump's Act in the best interests of businesses and working people, including, of course, Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Speaker. I was baffled on Monday that given the chance to support legislation backed by the National Crime Agency to crack down on criminal smuggler gangs and secure our borders, the parties opposite, the Conservatives and Reform, linked arms in the voting lobby to vote against it. The Conservatives spent 3 years and £700 million on their ludicrous Rwanda scheme and saw 4 volunteers returned. Does the Prime Minister agree with me? There is only one that is serious about repairing our broken immigration system.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and let me remind them what they voted against earlier this week in our Borders Bill. They voted against that's Reform and the Tories, they voted against making it an offence to organise the buying, selling and transport of small boats, making it an offence to endanger lives at sea, against, and powers to arrest suspected people smugglers before the smuggling takes place. They voted against. They voted for open borders, both of them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Prime Minister gave yet another threadbare excuse for why he and his North London lawyer friends are giving away the Chagos Islands. Mr. Speaker, this is his decision, and he must own it. More importantly, he can't tell us the British tax 18 billion. Is it 52 billion? The Times have called this botched deal insane. Members of his own cabinet reportedly think it's impossible to understand, and one of his own MPs think it's the worst thing the Labour Party have done. So could the Prime Minister tell us which word he thinks best to deal?
Mr. Speaker, I set out the position in relation to the Chagos Islands last week. I also offered the Leader of the Opposition a briefing on this, a high-level briefing. She'll back me up on that briefing. They're asking questions without wanting to know the facts. It's extraordinary. Mr. Speaker, someone who wants to be Prime Minister does not want to know the facts, even when she's offered a high-level briefing. He'd be better informed if she took me up on the offer of a briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will, I'm sure, want to congratulate Newcastle United on reaching the League Cup final after Arsenal's exit. But will he also National Apprentice Week, will he also congratulate the 600 apprentices learning trades from welding to quantity surveying as part of the Tyne Bridge restoration programme? And whilst I know he can't confirm bridging gap left by the Tories, will he confirm that he is looking forward to seeing the Tyne Bridge restored in time for its 100th birthday in 2028?
Well, look, I'm going to struggle to sound delighted with the results of that particular football match, but look, it will be a special day for Newcastle fans. But the Tyne Bridge is an iconic North East landmark, and I congratulate the apprentices who are helping to restore this vital piece of infrastructure. As usual, no intention of keeping, including £2.9 billion worth of transport commitments that were never funded. We will look at the capital project and the spending review and let her know as soon as we can.
Liz Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents, Peter and Maureen, have been married for 70 years. Peter is 93, and for the past few weeks he has been stuck on a hospital ward, waiting to go home because a care package hasn't been arranged. Peter is missing home and missing Maureen. I assure my constituents that the social care crisis will be tackled this year.
Well, can I thank her for raising this issue and the particular case of her constituents? And I also need to know this is deeply personal to her, and if I may, I extend my deep sympathies to her and her. We have taken immediate action on social care already. On the first ever fair pay agreement for the sector, and of course boosting the carers allowance. I invite her and everybody to work with the longer-term reform that we need. Thank you.
Julie Mims.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. James Rennie is an outstanding specialist school in the heart of my Carlisle constituency. having converted corner into classrooms, exceeded its published admissions numbers, and already having 43 applications known for this September, it is literally bursting at the seams. It cannot expand any further, and what is clearly needed is a new specialist school for North Cumbria. What assurances can the Prime Minister give my constituents that his government will put children before ideology and allow local authorities to tackle the shortage in SEND provision?
Well, I thank you for raising this vital issue. It's not the first time it's come up. We are supporting mainstream schools to increase SEND expertise whilst also establishing dedicated SEND units. Because we need to make sure that special schools also can cater for those with the most complex needs. So we're working on this. It's come up time and again, but we are doing that vital initial steps.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dorothy House is an amazing hospice that supports terminally ill people in Frumeney, Somerset and their families, including my good friend Lisa. Next year, Dorothy House will be looking forward to celebrating 50 years of service, but they will also be facing an additional cost of £422,000. And work with them to find a solution.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, everyone deserves high quality and compassionate end-of-life care. The member knows we inherited a 22. We took the difficult but right decisions. I do recognise the pressure that hospices are facing, and that's why we invested £100 million into hospitals. To
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A significant part of the dreadful legacy left by the previous Conservative government the North East Mayor Kim McGuinness used Leamside to reconnect Gateshead with Durham North, and increasing the capacity on the East Coast Main Line would help bring the metro to Washington and my constituency, and would bring much needed jobs, growth and opportunities to my region.
Well, I thank her, and both she and the North East Mayor are dedicated campaigners on this issue. Left us a host of unfunded promises, and public transport is in dire condition. Expanding the metro network has huge potential to drive growth and unlock new housing. I'm pleased that progress is being made on the business case.
Second Batty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, we learned the Prime Minister's close friend, the Attorney General, has in the past advised Caribbean nations on seeking trillions of pounds in reparations. He's been a key player in the surrender of the Chagos Islands and the related fiasco there, which will cost the taxpayers up to £18 billion, and has even advised Jerry Adams, who is standing in line to get compensation from the British government in all of the island legacy payments, the quantum of which could cost up to £2.7 billion. Given the Attorney General's track record, does the Prime Minister have faith in his motives, and does he have confidence that his best friend represents the British taxpayer?
Mr. Speaker, we've long had the principle that everybody's entitled to legal representation in this country. That means that lawyers don't necessarily agree with their client. Now, Conservative Party used to believe in that principle. If they now disagree with that principle, they should go and see the victims of very serious crime, including sexual crime, and tell them that under their provisions, the lawyer who disagreed with the perpetrator wouldn't be able to represent them, meaning that victims will be cross-examined by perpetrators because lawyers disagree with the perpetrator. That's never been the Conservative Party position. If it is now, they should say so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Allergy School, launched just this week by the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation, is a free programme to support children with food allergies. Allergic disease is a growing issue in this country, with over 20 million people in the UK being affected. For this reason, it has never been more important for us to have a national allergy strategy and an allergy czar to drive and coordinate that action. Will the Prime Minister join me in welcoming this programme, and will he meet with me and the Foundation to talk about how we can work together to drive this issue forward?
Well, I thank her for raising this really important issue, because hospital admissions for allergies have risen sharply, particularly in the last 2 decades. I do welcome the work being carried out by the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation. We will respond to the recommendations of the National Allergy Strategy Group in due course, and I'll make sure she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My Oxfordshire constituency of Didcot and Wantage has seen a 35% population increase in the last 20 years. My constituents recognise the need for affordable housing, but the current planning system isn't delivering the GP surgeries, dentists and transport options that they need. Will the Prime Minister restore faith in the planning system and, as well as focusing on housing numbers, deliver the local targets for health services and wider infrastructure that growing communities need?
Well, thank you for this question. We are, of course, delivering the 1.5 million homes, but we're creating communities as well for the future. And so he's right that must include good schools, GPs and reliable links makes a good community. And just today, Mr. Speaker, we announced £350 million to
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week is National Apprenticeship Week. As co-chair of the APPG for Apprenticeships, I can tell the Prime Minister that employers are very pleased to see the announcements this week that will make a real difference both in terms of the completion rate and the flexibility in apprenticeships. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that schools should be promoting apprenticeship alongside A-levels and other options? And can he tell us what more he's going to do to support more young people to get into an apprenticeship?
Well, I'm very pleased that he's raised this issue and that we'll be able to give employers more flexibility over maths and English requirements. This is really important, Mr. Speaker. There are very many young people who didn't get the maths qualification they wanted at the time, but are very future to play their part, and now they can get apprenticeships under the changes that we've made, and that's extra apprenticeships. This is delivering for them, giving them a chance for the future to contributing, of course, to our economy.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Farming Minister told a conference of farmers that farming is not high in the pecking order for this government. Given the heartless family farm tax, is his minister correct? Yes or no?
Farming's top of the agenda as far as I'm concerned. That's why we put £5 billion to support farmers in the budget. They failed to spend £300 million on their watch on farming, and we set out our roadmap, which has been welcomed by the NFU, as she very well knows. It was described as long overdue. I wonder who didn't do it before.
Mr. Jewett, I'm sure you don't want to be leaving today. It's not the best day. Right. Natasha Irons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of Croydon Youth Philharmonic Orchestra, the Prime Minister will know that youth services can broaden a young person's beyond what they could ever imagine. But we're spending on youth services seeing a 73% decline since 2010. Can the Prime Minister outline how this government will bring youth services back into our communities? Will he look at giving them the statutory protections they deserve? And will he visit Croydon East to see firsthand the vital role these services play in my constituency?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my days in the Croydon Youth Philharmonic Orchestra were a long time ago now. But we do fully recognise the importance of youth services to help young people save lives and live safe and healthy lives. We've been developing our plans for the new National Youth Strategy to bring power back to young people and help every young person realise their potential.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Every 22 minutes, a child in this country loses a parent or a loved one. That's 40,000 children a year facing a trauma which many of us here know can last a lifetime. Charities such as Winston's Wish do a fantastic job of providing support for young people, particularly when schools are closed or there's no to. At the moment, there's no simple way of the children knowing where the charities are or the charities being able to contact the children. So will the government back my Prime Minister this summer to do just that? And would the Prime Minister meet me to discuss how we make sure that another generation does not have to face this trauma?
Well, can I thank her for her ongoing work and campaign on this important issue. The Cross-Government Bereavement Group continues to look at how we can improve access to the support that children and young people need at these difficult times. And of course, I'll make sure that she gets the meeting that she wants with the Minister to discuss this further.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday marks the 20th anniversary of the launch of the Make Poverty History campaign, and a fantastic speech for all of us that were there, delivered by the late, great Madiba. That campaign inspired a generation of campaigners and a great Labour government to deliver unprecedented action to tackle global poverty, lifting millions out of poverty. Will the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to some of those campaigners and commit to doing all he can to ensure that Britain is playing its full part in helping eradicate global poverty today?
It's a really important issue. We do pay tribute, and of course we continue to play our full part.
Alex Bloor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Basingstoke Hospital, used by half of my constituency of North East Hampshire, has had its rebuild delayed by 15 years, despite no ministerial visit to see the worsening conditions there. The cost of maintaining the hospital for those 15 years is estimated to be almost as much as the rebuild itself. So can the Prime Minister explain the logic of making taxpayers pay twice?
Mr. Speaker, her constituents are right to be frustrated about the empty, unfunded promises that were left behind by the Conservatives, a point made by her and, of course, by the Labour MP for Basingstoke. Under the previous government's plan, a new hospital in Basingstoke would simply not have been delivered because it was unfunded. It was a promise without anything behind it. Put in place a funded deliverable plan which will see the hospital built, and we'll work closely with the Trust to ensure that it is.
Dr Becky Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's devolution plans are a welcome progressive development to shift PAM resources from Whitehall to our communities. But there are, of course, discussions now around the process and realisation of benefits for our communities. So can the Prime Minister assure my residents in Worthing West, and indeed all constituencies starting priority devolution programmes, that Sussex devolution will meet over our local priorities, including housing, transport and social care?
Minister. Well, I thank her for raising devolution, which will see her constituents in Sussex get meaningful control over local priorities. The devolution priority programme, Mr. Speaker, will see a wave of mayors elected next year, including in Sussex, and I believe that those with skin in the game make the best decisions about their communities.
Final question, Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be well aware of the Global Vaccination Fund, Gavi, one of the United Kingdom's great success stories. It's vaccinated from deadly diseases over 1 billion children under 5. It presents real value for money to British taxpayers, and over 80% of our constituents support it. Will he give the House today an undertaking that Britain will continue this leadership and make a decisive pledge at next month's replenishment conference?
Well, I'm grateful that this is a really important issue. As he rightly points out, I've long supported it and will continue as I can, but it is important, have supported it, will continue to do so. Thank you.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions.
Robert, the Conservative leader, Badenoch, has celebrated a milestone this week, 100 days in the job. How's she faring at PMQs and beyond so far in these early days of her taking over from Rishi Sunak?
Well, let's just start by saying that was one of the more tedious PMQs any of us have had the privilege of sitting through, and the tedious ones recently. The life seems to have gone out of Parliament. I mean, she was hopeless today. He'd answered. She had these prepared questions, ruling that allowed a Palestinian family to take advantage of the Ukraine resettlement scheme. She was obviously assuming that the Prime Minister maybe because he was a human rights lawyer, wouldn't sort of just say, actually, it was the wrong judgment and we've got to reverse it. But his very first answer was the Home Secretary regards this as a loophole that has to be closed. And he answered the question almost immediately, and then she asked,
I think she asked twice more.
Well, no, it was more than twice more. It was at least 3 times more. I can't remember whether she moved off it on or anything much else. Anyway, the point is that she kept going, repeating essentially the same question, which he had already answered. And I suspect not just MPs on his side, but when he said something that Prime Ministers don't often say on these occasions, this is getting tedious, I suspect anybody watching, and certainly people even on our own benches, would probably have agreed. It was lamentable.
And she did move off it in the end because she asked about the new Chief Inspector of Borders who, as it happens, lives in Finland. And
another humiliation for her.
Had said that he wanted to do some of his work from home. And she hadn't checked or hadn't clocked the fact that it was actually the Tories who hired him in his last role when he did even more of his work from home in Finland, and so that was,
and he also said
embarrassment upon him.
And he also said, which again presumably she wasn't expecting, that in giving this individual this new borders position, the government has now told him he has to live in the UK. So not only was he able to say he lived in Finland and you sanctioned it for many years while he was working for you, but by the way, having discovered that he's thinking about working in Finland, we told him he can't. So, I mean, it was ridiculously easy for Keir Starmer, who, let's not forget about this, is not the most accomplished political performer, but today, it was, what was the recent match? Where was it? The recent 7-0? It felt like 7-0. Basically.
Yeah, I mean, she was setting traps for him and then falling into them herself.
Yeah, it gave him the opportunity to call her out on what he said was sticking to her script and not actually listening to his answers. Let's listen to her when she first came to power, listing her priorities.
Our first responsibility as His Majesty's loyal opposition is to hold this Labour government to account. Our second is to prepare over the course of the next few years for government, to ensure that by the time of the next election, we have not just a clear set of Conservative pledges that appeal to the British people, but a clear plan for how to implement them. A clear plan to change this country by changing the way that government works.
I'm going to use that awful phrase, cutting through. Is she managing to cut through to voters with her message, with her priorities?
Well, not with opinion polls or any kind of a guide. I mean, Tories' ratings are continuing to fall, reforms to rise. I mean, let's be clear. This is against the backdrop of a government that has squandered whatever popularity it had at the time of the general election. Labour ratings falling as well. No, she's absolutely not cutting through, I would say, in any way. Well, she's cutting through, but I think only in the sense that most people would say she's a bit of a disappointment.
She's not been particularly visible, and that is her job, is to be visible. I think she does, in her defence, she wants to take a step-by-step approach to her leadership, and the first step in that is admitting the mistakes that the Tories made, then gradually and more strategically developing her platform. But actually, she's got to set a narrative for herself. She's got to tell people who she is and what she stands for, even if she doesn't have detailed policy. And nobody really expects the opposition to have detailed policies at this stage. But I'm not sure people even know what she stands for.
And, I mean, what her colleagues say, who still, certainly mostly support her. I mean, one of the things that we should notice is this was a party that acquired a pathological habit of civil war while they were in power. Certainly superficially, we are not hearing from Tory MPs, massively vicious criticism. Now, I think beneath the surface, and privately, they are worried. But we are not seeing an outbreak of hostilities against her. She does have supporters. There are many respected Tory MPs who think she's marvellous. They come up like, that she reminds them of Margaret Thatcher, and then they say, and don't forget that it was years before Margaret Thatcher acquired any kind of national popularity. And it's certainly true after I think she became leader in 1975. Yeah, in fact, come to think of it, is, believe it or not, 50th anniversary. And the opening years, particularly in a very sexist world, she was regarded as a joke and faced lots of criticism. And then she went on to be, one of the most important prime ministers, one would argue, since the war. The difference, however, is those days people were just more patient.
Yeah,
right. And we live in a world. Is at what point, if Tory fortunes continue to fall against an unpopular government, at what point do Tory MPs conclude that she's not up to it? It was quite interesting today. We saw the challenger, the one who got through to the last round of the Tory election campaign, Robert Jenrick, regarded as well to the right of her, wants to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, sitting next to her at PMQs. You would argue that her line of attack against Keir Starmer today was very much a Jenrick kind of criticism of the government. Didn't work for her at all today. There are many people who tell me that Jenrick is still running a sort of what they call a submarine leadership campaign, that beneath the, because he does still very much want that job. And so, she definitely can't be confident, even with the change in the rules that make it harder for Tory MPs to dislodge her. She can't be confident that she will be leader at the time of the next general election.
Robert, has her team reached out to you?
Are you going to get back to something I had a conversation with on this programme comparatively recently? So I did say on this programme that their media operation was one of the most eccentric that I'd ever come across, because, 100 days into her time in office, I text, their main media people, and it's just like texting into a black hole. You just don't get a reply. If you do my kind of job, right, you would expect a couple of things. You'd expect to have done an interview with the leader of the opposition by now. Yeah. 0 interviews since she became leader. And you might expect to have a private chat with her. 0 private chat with her since becoming leader. I mean, you might think that ITV and its viewers were an important constituency for the Tory party, but apparently their leader doesn't think so.
Well, the story is that she doesn't like doing media, which, if that's true, is a significant disadvantage when your job is to be seen and to get out there.
And it's particularly a disadvantage when your performance is as it was today on social media. I don't think the Tories will be Kemi Badenoch putting that on social media today. So new media is not working for them either, you might argue.
How unusual is it that she seemingly isn't taking that briefing meeting with the Prime Minister on a really serious international issue?
That's an extraordinary thing, to not have taken him up on something that is one of the attack lines that your party is using.
But also but also who's advising her on this stuff? Like last week, right, he does a big spiel about, there are security implications here. I'm offering you the chance for a, high-level security services briefing on this. Now, if I leader of the call his bluff, I'd want to know if this stuff is real. Absolutely. Right? And so, I mean, what has she got to lose in taking the briefing? So it is weird that it's a humiliator again on another issue by simply saying, why isn't she essentially listening to MI5 and MI6?
It's not because she's busy doing interviews.
She's relatively new in the job, so is President Trump in his second term. We're in a situation where we're almost like changing the news agenda day by day, sometimes hour by hour. by what's coming out of Washington and last night, by what's coming out of Washington and seeing these, well, frankly, bizarre pictures of Elon Musk in the Oval Office. Some have described it as bring your child today. What did you make of what we saw?
So, I mean, just to be absolutely clear, in what has been a completely exhausting period of global politics, where literally for 30 minutes before, Donald Trump says something never expected, leader of America. I loved, actually, the little interlude of the Oval Office with Elon Musk's son, who he takes. I mean, one of the things is, Elon Musk, one of the most extraordinary characters in modern history, richest man in the world, most powerful industrialist in the world. Time last, a few days ago, pictured him on their mocked-up cover behind the Oval Office desk, claiming that he's more powerful than Trump. Trump obviously enjoyed that. It was literally extraordinary to see them talking about all the fraud in government, the way that they are, dismantling the whole government machine, complaining about judges trying to stop them. And let's be clear, one of the big constitutional issues around all of this is the extent to which the judiciary will put a brake on the remaking of American government in this utterly radical way by Musk and Trump. And then whether at that point Trump will then seek to reduce the powers of the judiciary and therefore have a wholesale onslaught on another aspect of the American Constitution. Anyway, the joy of all of this was to see little X, Musk's son, standing there with his suit and tie on, sort of basically talking probably more common sense than any of the adults in the room. It was joyful.
Did you find it joyful?
Well behaved. He was very well behaved, I thought.
I thought there was a bit where he picked his nose, but we perhaps shall move on from that. Obviously, big issue is Gaza, but also Ukraine, and we've got Trump's new defence secretary in Europe. Let's have a listen, a taster of what he's going to be talking about in the days ahead.
The president has said directly that our NATO allies need to step up even more. We're appreciative of what they've done. The alliance is rock solid, but any sort of an alliance needs full burden sharing. So we're going to talk a lot more about that.
Happened this morning that I think are important. One is that Pete Hegseth has been meeting John Healey at the beginning, our defence secretary, at the beginning of, that was Pete Hegseth, by the way, Trump's defence secretary, at the beginning of the Ukraine contact group session, which is where different nations get together, decide how they're going to support Ukraine. Now, the significant thing is that up until today, that group has always been chaired by the United States. Today, the United States has stepped back and John Healey is chairing that group. So there is concern that that signals something about America's commitment to Ukraine. The other thing...
Pete Hegseth will have a TV presenting...
yeah.
I mean, it's because, we should worry that our defence secretary, was a long time.
The other thing in terms of spending is that the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, has just been giving a press conference and he was asked about spending. Remember, NATO countries are all supposed to spend 2% of GDP on defence. There's a big argument in this country about at what point the government might get to spending 2.5%. Mark Rutte has just said there's a conversation going on in NATO, and he expects NATO to end up asking everyone to be paying something north of 3%. So that is in excess even of where the UK government is not yet getting to be. So, and that is because there is concern again about whether or not the US will pay for the defence of Europe when European countries aren't willing to. And this is a rerun of what happened last time with Trump, right? I mean, last time around, Trump famously made all these noises on commitment there was within the US to NATO, and it panicked everyone into spending. I mean, it worked. It panicked everyone into spending more on defence, and it's happening again.
Well, it's a rerun with the stakes, though, significantly higher because, the great uncertainty is as what we've heard Trump doubling down on America will own Gaza. So they're just going to take control of it. Before he was inaugurated, the widespread view among security specialists was that Trump was going to agree a deal with Putin that would surrender a significant amount of land to Putin, and we'll now just have to wait and see whether or not what transpires, something that most of Europe will regard as a dangerous surrender. Deeply troubling times. I mean, Trump disclosed to, I think, a New York Post reporter that he's already had private conversations with Putin since becoming president. We have no idea what the content of all of that was. It was very interesting, though, with the release overnight of the school teacher who was being held by Putin as a prisoner. Welcomed that as a sign of thawing relations with Putin. It is also significant that, unfortunately, my brain is doing that senior moment for envoy who was Moscow. This is the first time since the invasion of Ukraine that anybody representing the US government has been to Moscow. Things are moving.
Things are moving, and Trump has shown that he will happily make policy on behalf of his allies with what he's done over Gaza and the hostages in the last few days. I mean, he just talked right over the deal to release 3 Israeli hostages at the weekend and said, no, they've all got to come out. And the Israelis have now rode in behind. So he will make policy on the hoof, and he'll make policy for his allies. And because he is so powerful, people end up rowing in behind what he says much of the time.
Talking of allies and rowing in behind, something that got a little lost in the mix this week was the UK effectively going along the same lines as America and not voting for these safeguarding precautions voted in on Paris on AI. What was your take on that, Robert?
That it is a sort of diplomatic initiative by Starmer to, try and curry a bit of favour from the Americans in the hope maybe, when we get to these crunch decisions about, for example, whether to impose the new steel tariffs on the UK, whether to impose whatever other tariffs are coming down the track, because he is threatening other tariffs, whether, or, as I say, essentially whether the UK can get an exemption. I mean, I thought it was sort of, I'm going to choose my words carefully, I thought it was gesture politics because, this Macron statement, it's non-binding. It's just, if you read it, it's a sort of lot of airy-fairy stuff about we want safe AI, we want AI that works for the people, we want open development and all the rest of it. Great. It's obviously what everybody wants. There's no harm in signing up to a set of principles that any right-thinking person would agree with. Trump doesn't like signing any international agreements of any sort. Obviously, they're not going to sign, and we rode in for reasons that I think are all to do with, as I say, just sucking up to Trump. I mean, strikingly, a country that doesn't believe in openness, China, had no problem signing it.
On the dotted line. OK. Robert and Carl, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. PMQs will be back next Wednesday at 11:50 a.m. live here on ITVX. And you can catch up on everything we discussed today on our podcast, Talking Politics, available on your favourite podcast platform and on the news section of ITVX. But for now, from all of us here, goodbye.